Turn something up. Hello. Stay close. Higher up. Stand further back. You take that away. It has traction. Shalom Aleichem. Wein is it's the first time we're speaking here with the speaker system. Yasher Koach Shalom. Can everybody hear me? Rav Wein is known to everybody. He's one of my mentors, and although Rabbi Wein and myself, we didn't have a lot of, unfortunately, we don't have a lot of connection, but I'm always in his wake. Rabbi Wein was the Rav of Beis Torah for decades, and when I came and took over and heard about for years and years of what big shoes I have to fill and what big shoes I never filled, I inherited a kahila which was like this one, Yotzei Min HaKlal. And the reason it was Yotzei Min HaKlal, and I've spent a long time thinking about this, probably about 40 years, is that the way Klal Yisrael is set up in all these different groups and all these different types of Jews, from Jews, came to a kahila that was somehow above it all, somehow transcended all of these borders. And it was obvious that the reason that was because Rabbi Wein transcends all of those labels and transcends all of those borders. It's not just that you can't put your finger on Rabbi Wein, he's just simply above it all. He's above it all. And tonight, it's a big schus for our Beis HaKnesses, for our Kehillah, and for Ramat Beit Shemesh to host Rabbi Wein. I'd like to thank the sponsors of the evening, which are Yaakov and Esther Koni, Rabbi Yisrael and Gitti Uri, Jeffrey and Elizabeth Miller, Trevor and Shirley Stemmelman, and Dan and Rivki Weiss. Yasher Koach to you. It should be a schus for you for sponsoring this. Tonight we're Mekayim a pasuk. Torah says, Shal avicha v'yagedcha zekeinecha v'yomer lach. Shal avicha v'yagedcha. Moshe Rabbeinu told us that throughout history, as history unfolds, through Golus, through Eretz Yisrael, Golus, Eretz Yisrael, we must not only be aware of the history of all of those generations, but Sha'al Avicha V'Yagedcha, we have to understand the Masorah. You know, here in the shul, we gave a series on Tanakh this past summer, just finished it. And it became so clear to me that if you don't understand this, you don't understand Yiddishkeit. And this is what Moshe Rabbeinu was saying, Sha'al Avicha V'Yagedcha. Do you want to understand what Yiddishkeit is? Don't look to the right or to the left. Ask the Zekeinecha V'Yomer Lach. Sha'al Avicha V'Yagedcha. Rabbi Wein is not a historian. He's one of the Balei Masorah. He has taught thousands and thousands of people, originally through his shul and cassette tapes and videos, and now gets out there even more. He is the Baal HaMasorah. He probably, in the generation, the one that's teaching us all what was, what is, and what could be. And that's a big schus for us, and I'd like to welcome Harav Wein.
Thank you, Rabbi Haber, Rabbi and Rebbetzin Haber, who have built such a wonderful kehillah here in Ramat Beit Shemesh, to add to all of what they have accomplished in the years that they were in the United States. Rabbi Haber gave me such a generous introduction that I can hardly wait to hear what I have to say. During this period of time that we are now passing through, the days of the beginning of Av, it becomes clear, I think, to all of us that all of Jewish life and Jewish history revolves about two processes called Galut and Geulah. And the process takes many times, not only generations, but centuries to unfold. And many times, therefore, we are unable to recognize the process. And we're born into the middle of it. And whatever was, we think, is whatever is going to be. And we don't see the overarching picture that really exists. For that, we had Nevi'im, the prophets of Israel, who explain things in eternal terms. And they outlined what the Galut would be, and the same prophet outlined what the Geulah would be. We're going to read the Shabbat Chazon, the Haftorah of Yeshaya Hanovi, which is one of the strongest indictments of the Jewish people on record, and which says what the price will be. And then for 7 weeks we will read other chapters of the Navi that extol the virtues of the Jewish people and portray for us our redemption and what will be, and in fact part of the process that we are undergoing now. So what should be the difference between the view of Jewish history, let's say, as taught from a Torah point of view, if I could be so bold, and Jewish history that's taught in one of the major universities here in the land of Israel or elsewhere in the world? No one disagrees on the facts. Everybody can tell you what year Rashi was born, what year the Crusades occurred. All of the stories, all of the narratives, all of the facts are agreed upon. There's one fundamental difference, and absolutely, in my opinion, that's the key to everything, is that Jewish history is providential history. What does Providence think about it? What is the role of heaven, so to speak? And secular history doesn't take that into account at all. And because of that, secular history becomes not flawed, but it becomes boring. It's a bunch of dates and names and places. and it becomes academics speaking to each other. But as Rabbi Haber pointed out, our history is supposed to speak to us, to each one of us. It's not only about what was, it's about what is. How do we understand Ramat Beit Shemesh today? How did we get here? What are we doing here? What are we supposed to be doing here? Those are the questions that Jewish history asks. My parable for that is, I'm Baruch Hashem, a grandfather and a great-grandfather, B'li Ayin Hora, many times over. The Lord has blessed me beyond my wildest imagination. So there was a time in my life when, as a good grandfather, so if my 2 or 3 year old grandson had a birthday, so I would go to the toy store, and after doing a great deal of research as to what toy would be most educational and would help in his maturation and allow him to grow into the genius that he undoubtedly will be, and I would buy that toy. And on the great day, I would present it to my 3-year-old grandson, and he would spend the rest of the afternoon playing with the box. And to me, that's a metaphor about us. Most of our life is spent playing with the box, with the packaging. And we never get to enjoy the toy. We never get to see what really is going on. And because of that, therefore, there is a certain emptiness in our lives, a certain weakness in our vision that leads to sadness, frustration, and to a lack of appreciation of the great gifts that are bestowed upon us. So I want to, if I may, and I can because I'm the only one standing here, but if I want to, so to speak, trace for you how we got here, providentially, with the toy and not with the box. And I think it's important for us to view it in this fashion. Jewish people are in exile from the year 70, and now it's the middle of the 19th century, and things are terrible. Russia, the Tsar, an anti-Semite, an anti-Semitic government, pogroms, poverty. Anybody that tells you the Alta Haim was wonderful is not telling you the truth. I once heard a very strong statement from Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky, Zecher Tzadik L'Vrocha, very strong statement. And for years I hesitated to repeat it. But I once had a discussion with him about the Shoah, about the why, which is the basic question that, what happened here? How did heaven allow it to happen? What was involved? So he said to me in his wisdom, he said, you know, in Europe, then later in America, you know, if a person had a business, had a store, and it was failing, so many times people did things illegally, and they burned down the store because the business was failing. And that was his description of the Shoah. He said Eastern Europe was already bankrupt. So the Rebbe Shalom Kaviyachal burned it down. I never thought of it in those terms. But it set me thinking about a broader view of things. So in the middle of the 19th century, after 1750, 1800 years of Galut, there's no chance for the Jewish people to come back to Eretz Yisrael. Under any circumstances. The land of Israel is then under the Ottoman Empire. It's been under the Ottoman Empire since the 1500s. If something is for 400 years or 500 years, so then we believe it's always going to be like that. So you got the Ottoman Turks in the land of Israel who are not going to let the Jews here. And there really is no way for any sort of Jewish settlement in the country to occur. Then things begin to happen. Pieces of the puzzle. You look at them in isolation, none of them make any sense. And people don't even realize they're putting the puzzle together. But things begin to happen. The Netziv of Volozhin, the great Rosh Yeshiva, he together with others, and many of the others were secular Jews, found an organization called Chovevei Tzion. The organization is based upon the fact that Talmidim of the Gaon of Vilna, of the Baal Shem Tov, of the Tzemach Tzedek, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, came to the land of Israel. They did not come to establish a state. They did not come to establish a Jewish presence in the community. They came as individuals to live as Jews in Eretz Yisrael. They have to be supported. There's no economy in the country. The country is poor and barren. You know, all the trees that you see in Israel today, Baruch Hashem, very few of them are more than 100 years old. Country had no trees, had no population, had no economy. So they have to be supported. An idea that has remained in Israeli society even when they no longer have to be supported. In 1870, there was a war between Prussia and France. Good, has nothing to do with us. Prussia defeats France in 6 weeks. Destroys 2 French armies, marches into Paris, topples Napoleon II, creates a new republic, exacts reparations from the French, takes away Alsace and Lorraine from France, and annexes it to Germany. Terrible defeat for France. Okay. Has nothing to do with us, right? I'm learning Baba Kama. What do I care about France? Because to a certain extent, I'm playing with the box. France, the French public is unwilling to accept the defeat. They say our army couldn't have been that bad. Can't lose in 6 weeks, though they would lose again in 6 weeks in 1940. Something must have gone here wrong. And therefore, they are convinced that there were spies in the French general staff who were working for the Germans and who gave all of the information to the Germans. That's why the Germans knew where the French army was, what its plans were. That's why they beat them. And the French general staff, as only heaven can do this. You know, Chazal say, Yemei HaPurim O'ele Lo Yavru Mitoch HaYehudim. That Purim will remain after everything else is Asidim HaMoadim Libotel. However, we'll understand that. The Yontiv won't be necessary anymore. But Purim will always be. What's Purim? Purim is a series of unconnected events without God's name appearing in the Megillah, without any frumkeit in the Megillah that describes how history works. And that will never pass from us. That will never disappear from us. So here we have a disconnected event. You have a war, a defeat. There's one Jew on the French general staff. He's a captain. Everybody else on the French general staff is at least a colonel or a general. He's the lowest ranking. He's a Jew by the name of Dreyfus, Alfred Dreyfus. And the search for the spy intensifies, and there were spies, and the two real spies, Colonel Henri and Colonel Esterhazy, were afraid that they were going to get caught. So they framed Dreyfus because he was the lowest ranking member of the staff and he was Jewish. So obviously he was disloyal. And they have a trial. Okay, that's one piece of the puzzle. In Vienna, there's an assimilated Jew who never had a bar mitzvah. His grandfather was a Rav in Bosnia. He's the drama critic for the leading newspaper in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the New Free World. And that newspaper is owned by Jews. And it was the newspaper of record in Europe. There are great similarities between it and the New York Times. It was not only owned by assimilated Jews, it was owned by assimilated Jews who hated Jews. And he's a respected critic, op-ed writer, and they send him to Paris to cover the trial. And Dreyfus is naturally found guilty, and he's publicly paraded before 30,000 people in Paris, and they rip the epaulets off his shoulders, and they break his sword, and they send him to Devil's Island, where prisoners didn't last more than 6 months. And as he's being marched off, the mob shouts, "Death to the Jews." Now, this is France. Liberty, fraternity, equality. The Marseillaise. Herzl is shocked. For the first time, he realizes he's a Jew. And therefore, he thinks about it. And he comes to the conclusion that the reason that there's anti-Semitism in the world is because the Jews are, as he framed it, abnormal. They're not normal. They don't have a country, don't have an anthem, they don't have a common language. He said if we had a country and we had an anthem, 1896 was the first Olympics, if we had an Olympic team, His famous phrase was, we would be like Guatemala. Nobody hates Guatemala except for the Guatemalans, but otherwise. So we'd be normal. And that's how political Zionism is born. It was born to eradicate anti-Semitism. The irony always that heaven mocks us, and that even though the state was created and we're normal and we have an anthem and we have a country and we have a flag and we have an Olympic team and we win judo, the world still doesn't seem to like us that much. But that's a piece of the puzzle. In 1898, Herzl meets the Kaiser of Germany here outside of what is today Tel Aviv. Then it was a sand dune at a place called Mikveh Yisrael, which was an agricultural school. And he proposes to the Kaiser that the Jews will build a homeland here and that Germany should protect them and they'll be part of the German Empire. 1898. It's only 35 years before Hitler. The Kaiser tells him, Herr Herzl, you know that is impossible. And he tells him as follows, in order for a Jewish state to arise in the land of Israel, all of the major empires of the world will have to collapse. And he counts them. The Ottoman Empire, the German Empire, the French Empire, the British Empire, the Russian Empire. He said, and Herr Herzl, you know that is impossible. 20 years later, it happened. At the end of the First World War, all the empires were gone. And those that still remained, though they didn't know it then, were really dead men walking. They had no chance. So the Kaiser was a prophet. The Rabboni Shalom placed in his mouth what was going to happen. But how could it happen? The First World War got rid of all of them. Nobody foresaw the First World War. It's the war that everybody stumbled into. Nobody realized its consequences. Much of what we see in the world today is still a consequence not of the Second World War, but of the First World War. So, in order for a Jewish state to arise in the land of Israel, we got to get rid of the Ottoman Turks. That's the first thing. So, they disappeared. In their place comes Great Britain. In order for a Jewish state to exist, you have to get rid of Great Britain. Now, the British had made commitments to the Jews, the Balfour Declaration, etc. And Winston Churchill, who was the great prime minister during World War II, was pro-Jewish and pro-Zionist. So the British, in a great expression of gratitude, voted him out of office in 1945. And that is very important, because after the Shoah, the Zionist movement asked that Great Britain allow 100,000 Jews to come into the land of Israel. They didn't ask for a state. They didn't ask for anything else. They asked, "Look, give us 100,000 certificates." I don't know why that magic number, but that was it. There were 250,000 refugees in Germany, but they asked for 100,000. The British Foreign Secretary, Ernest Bevin, who was an anti-Semite, and who after the war said the Jews should not try to push to the head of the queue, he said, "Not one." Now, if Churchill would have been in power, he would have given him the 100,000 certificates. And if we got the 100,000 certificates, so that's it. That's all you asked for. What now? What do you want? But Ernest Bevin was the foreign secretary. And he said, "Not one." Oh, not one. So then the whole thing started to unfold and unravel. And it became, because of the pressure of the Jews here in the country and Jews throughout the world, England eventually realized it could not maintain its position here there. So it gives it to the United Nations. Now, if we would have given it to the United Nations today, I need not describe for you what would have happened. But this is 1947. The world still has a guilty conscience about what happened. And the United States under Harry Truman, so then also a piece of the puzzle. If Franklin Roosevelt would have been alive, and the Jews in the United States believed in Franklin Roosevelt like they believed in the Messiah. I remember the day that he passed away, everybody on the street in the Jewish neighborhood wept, real tears. So now we know that it's not such a tragedy. We know that he promised King Saudi Arabia that he was going to give Palestine to the Arabs. That was part of the commitment that he made to get Arab oil. But he died. And in his place comes a Missouri farmer by the name of Harry Truman, who nobody ever heard of before, and who Roosevelt chose as a vice president at the last moment because he was afraid that his previous vice president, Henry Wallace, was a communist, which he probably was. But